Thank you everyone for being here. I know it's 4 p.m., so no small feat, and we're very grateful you're here. My name is Maria. I'm the co-founder of GoodQues, like Good Question, and I'll let Kira introduce herself.
I'm Kira. I'm the brand insights lead for Jameson, Irish whiskey, and the Glenlivet, and a few other beloved brands at Pernod Ricard.
Perfect. So what you can expect. So our session will be a little bit of a different format than I think what you guys might be used to. We do something of a hybrid session. So 50% of the time I'll be talking to you, I'll be giving you guys insights, learnings, etc. And 50% of the time we'll be asking Kira questions. And how it will work, we'll do a little practice round, is you'll get to vote on the question that we ask Kira. So I'll read the 3 questions and then we'll do a vote by show of hands. So for example, quick little practice round. Kira, how did you get started in your career? Or Kira, what's your go-to book or podcast for professional inspiration? Or what is your favorite cocktail? So by show of hands, who wants Kira to answer question A, question B, and question C? All right,
wow.
Well, question B is like slightly the winner, slight margin.
I know this is like it's maybe a competitor, I don't know, but I do really love the Greenberg podcast a lot about, they just have fantastic insights and insights professionals on it. It's great, would recommend.
Excellent, all right, so we know how the session is going to work, so let's begin. So we're all here for the reason that we ask questions, right? That is our job, and it's deceptively simple. But the trick is that the second you start to ask the question, you're already influencing the answer. Because we are working against human nature, right? We all talk about this all the time. So people self-censor. They give you the answers that make them sound normal. People misremember. We think memories are like a cookie jar. You reach your hand in, you take out the cookie, but that's not the case. We're fabricating what we think we remember. And then people rationalize. Post-fact, after it happened, they start to think about their behavior and they start to explain it in their own head. So it's not exactly what happened, but it's what they think has happened. The question shapes the answer always, and I know what you're thinking. What if I ask a non-leading neutral question, right? That's what I was trained to do. That should work, right? Well, the fallacy is that it doesn't. It's actually an effect called the chameleon effect in psychology. And what it says is that people mimic the tone, the style, the body language of the interaction. So if you are asking a neutral, robotic, boring question, you're probably getting neutral, robotic, boring answers. Albeit the insight is not great. So what's interesting, and I actually won't talk about this for a very long time because I know you guys are all inundated with AI things, but this does apply to how we ask questions of AI as well. So with AI, we're still working against human nature, right? And that's because LLMs, the models, they're written by humans, so there's inherent bias. There's even a kind of social desirability bias within AI as well. So as you're thinking about our session today, really think about how you're asking questions of people, but also how you're asking questions of AI. The prompt engineering kind of principles are the same. So what follows, what we'll be talking to you guys about today, is a human case study, but like I said, think about it to inspire your prompt engineering. So without further ado, the psychology of better data, rethinking how we ask, frame, and listen. So now's our time to ask Kira questions. So I'll read out the 3 and then we'll do the same kind of vote with show of hands. So question A, as a client, how much do you think about question design, or do you mostly trust the research partner to figure that out? Question B, what does it take organizationally to get a spirits brand to invest in understanding fandom rather than just running a brand tracker? We'll be talking about fandom. And what was the moment you knew Jameson Brief needed something different than what you've done before? So all those in favor of question A, question B, and question C. All right, question C for the winner.
All right. So I think, fandom was something that we were set out to understand for Jameson, both soccer and football fandom. And I know that I know that people think that they are able to read like really qualitative sort of like interesting data from any normal methodology. But I think the thing that's really unique about fandom is just how emotional and also how I think like innate it is to people. It is so close to people that I think oftentimes they don't necessarily think about it. It's just the thing that they were born into, or it's, you know, the thing that they just happen to do every Sunday, but there's not necessarily any reason why. They've just been doing it forever, right? It's very habituated, but it's so emotional. And so I think knowing that we needed to really, really unpack it for our brand team led us to a more interesting approach.
Beautiful. Okay, so the case study, as we kind of started to float here, is going to be Jameson fandom study. So what we were trying to find out is what is the behavior for MLS and NFL fans, and how can Jameson fit into their rituals, their habits around drinking culture? So some of the research questions we were grappling with is, how do fans define and experience their fandom? What emotional and social needs does fandom fulfill? What are the rituals, routines, and behaviors that structure game day, and when does alcohol fit in general, and of course whiskey? How does whiskey fit into the sports occasion? So on and so forth. So pretty heavy questions that we absolutely needed a little bit more of a creative approach to answer. So a moment for Kira. So 3 questions. Question A, what were your main hypotheses going into this study, and which one surprised you the most? Question B, what were your reservations about using a more creative approach for a quantitative study? And question C, what does Pernod Ricard typically look for in a research partner, and how did GoodQues fail to fit that brief? So question A, question B, and question C. All right, question C.
All right, I think this is probably not unique to Pernod Ricard, but I think that oftentimes we are sort of chasing whatever the next sort of interesting tool is. And I think, you know, for something like this, I don't know that a tool was necessarily the answer. I think what I really loved about working with GoodQues and about, you know, their proposal and all of that was that it wasn't about the tool. It was really about the new methodology. And it wasn't, you know, sort of chasing a shiny new thing. It was just like, oh, we can ask people better questions. Great.
Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to go over is a mixed method study. It's half quantitative, half qualitative, and I'll talk to you guys about the hurdles that we were looking to overcome with the research design in particular. So first and foremost, we knew that we were against social desirability bias. Why? Because we were talking about drinking, right? As soon as you ask someone the question of how much do you drink, the instinct is to answer with moderation, with control, with how you want to be perceived versus what you're actually doing. And so in standard surveys, we know in standard studies across the board, people regularly underestimate how much they drink. So if you admit something like, I was already drinking before kickoff, or yeah, I drink a little bit more if they lose, you're actually admitting that you're a bit of a problem drinker, and no one wants to do that. So that was problem hurdle number 1. So what did we do to overcome it? How did creativity play a role? So we knew that we needed to ask questions sideways to avoid the feeling that people are confessing. We don't want people to feel that they are in a confessional with us. Cue inside joke. And instead we want to ask it in a much more creative way. So what we did is we did 2 things actually. 1, we gave respondents characters to choose from. So we said, are you the pre-gamer, so someone who's already, you know, a few in before the game even starts? Or are you the guzzler? Game day is the excuse to go all out, man, right? So which one are you? And are you both? Are you many of these things? So this is actually a really powerful technique. It's a projective technique. And what happens is it's a way to create distance between what you are, who you are, and what you're doing, which is a really, really interesting effect. And then on top of that, we asked where whiskey might fit in across different culture, across different moments, phases, rituals, etc. So again, creating kind of these scenarios and creating, again, that psychological distance of this is not who I am, but this is what I do. This is my ritual. This is my projective technique. And it was a really, really interesting outcome. We said, you know, the standard survey would tell us that sports equals beer. But with creativity, what this revealed is that sports can equal whiskey too. So we saw that whiskey was actually the #1 spirit across every phase of game day, which is really, really interesting that that was the unlock. And so a few questions for Kira. So question A, how do you sell a creative quant approach internally when stakeholders just want a standard survey? Question B, whiskey holding steady from kickoff to last call for you, is that a product story, a marketing story, or both? And question C, which audiences do you find benefit most from a human approach versus standard approach? So question A, question B, and question C.
Yes,
Ooh,
that was the one I wanted.
All right, go ahead.
I think everybody, like, is that a cop-out to say everybody? I think at the moment, everyone is sort of chasing the new shiny thing, and everyone is really working off of a lot of the same data sets. And I think when everyone is working off of a lot of the same data sets, a lot of your results end up being the same. And so I think ultimately as insights folks, it is our job to ensure that, like, whoever your stakeholders are, whether that be marketers or strategy folks or whoever, that they stay connected to the human and to the consumer and to the people that we're actually trying to reach. And so from that perspective, I think a human-centered approach is best across the board.
Perfect. So let's talk about another hurdle that we were faced with specifically in quantitative. So this one is called the fundamental attribution error. So I'm sure you guys are thinking about this already. But what happens is that people assume that their behavior is consistent. And the fallacy, the mistake that we make as researchers is we think that too when we're designing a study. So if you ask something like, what do you drink at games? You get an identity answer. You don't get a situational answer. But the truth is that shifts, that changes. It depends, what's the score? What's the quarter? What's the mood? What's the stakes? Is it the playoff or a regular boring game? That's what's going to determine what you're drinking and what you're doing. It's not this consistent thing. And so the creative approach here, we had to be highly specific. We had to be uniquely contextual. And we had to ask questions very differently. So we asked fans, of course, what they drink, when, across every game phase, before, during, and after. But then we upped the stakes even more. We started to ask, okay, what about by game intensity? What about by rivalry? What are the two teams playing? What about by matchups? What about by playoffs? What about by losses? And so what happens is when you're not overgeneralizing questions, you're not getting overly general answers. That's the unlock, and that's what's really, really interesting. And so the superb insight here that we found was that beer does own the game, but it does not own the night. And so we saw that when we asked these highly contextual questions, that fans fall off sharply from drinking beer once the game ends and they switch to spirits. So again, really, really interesting here when we start to unpack what their habits, what their rituals, what their routines are. So 3 more questions for Kira. So A, how does a moment-based insight like this actually change how a brand like Jameson goes to market? B, many research reports sit in a deck and die. Don't we all know it? Did the creative approach help to give this report a different fate? And question C, do you have any advice for encouraging teams to break out of repetitive routines and adopt a more creative approach? So question A, question B, and question C. Question A for the win.
All right. I think a few things. So the first is that, you know, a brand like Jameson, I think that we know that we are up against both spirits and also beer when it comes to sports. I think that for Jameson, what that meant was how can we embrace what the current behavior is of the consumer and sort of shift our strategy to really like be alongside beer in specific moments, as opposed to, you know, try to compete with something that is so ingrained in fan culture. And then the other piece is, you know, how can we talk about ourselves in other moments that are not necessarily specific to the intense moments of the game or nursing a beer throughout the game, right? So whether that is celebrating after or, you know, my team just scored, like I need something that isn't just a beer, you know, those sort of little in-between moments. What are the ways that we can maybe own some of that? So I think ultimately, largely a marketing story, to go back to that previous question as well. Although, of course, there, I think, are product implications, but I think largely like how we're talking about ourselves.
Beautiful. Okay, so we know it was a mixed method study. We covered some of the hurdles of quantitative. Let's talk a little bit about the qualitative component. So another issue that we were dealing with is the fact that emotion encodes memory. And what that means is people very rarely remember factual sequences, but they remember how they felt. And so when you say, describe your game day experience, you get, I watched the game and eat wings. But ask someone to recall the game day and they'll reconstruct it really flatly if you ask it that flatly. So what we had to do is we had to access emotions. So we didn't ask about feelings, we didn't ask about anything other than give us 10 images that represent your game day. And what we saw is we saw that how the emotion could surface based on the visuals that represent. And we all know that, what did they say? An image tells 1,000 words or something like that, right? So that was kind of the guiding principle here. And the human insight is Joseph. So Joseph is a New York Giants fan. When he built his mood board, he included his couch, he included his favorite cup, he included a lot of the standard stuff. But what was really, really interesting is that he also included this mascot. But then he talked to us about it after, and he said that it's a mascot he co-owns with his wife, which is a love language. It's almost like co-owning what a pet. It's almost dual ownership like you would of a child. That tells the story so much deeply in terms of how much sports bonds them, how it's not a thing that he experiences alone, but it's a thing that's very much shared. So that was one of the more interesting things to come out of just a visual. So a few more questions for Kira. So question A, marketers need answers, not just insights. So how do you bring the richness of a study like this to a team that needs executional answers? Question B, what does a good research mean to a brand like Jameson? And question C, what's a category assumption Pernod Ricard held for a long time that these findings might have forced you to let go of? So question A, question B, and question C. All right, question C.
All right. I think a few things, honestly, that I was really surprised by in this study. The first genuinely was like the beer spirits insight. I think we assumed that it was absolutely impossible to own moments of a game because of the presence of beer, and that just simply isn't true. I also think, it's not necessarily a category assumption, but we looked at MLS fans and also NFL fans, and I think going into it, an assumption that I had was that these fandoms are just so drastically different, which they are to an extent, but I was really interested in the ways that some of their fandom sort of interconnects and the connective tissue between the two. Because MLS fans and, especially like casual soccer fans, they actually are so engaged in like the data and following the players and, sort of the behind the scenes piece of it, that they look pretty similar to kind of like intense football fans. So that was really interesting to me.
Beautiful. Okay, and the last hurdle that we were faced with that I think you guys probably deal with in your absolute everyday lives, which is the bane of everyone's existence here, the say versus do gap. And what's interesting here is that people don't always know what drives behavior, but standard study expects that people will just tell us the truth. And what creative research does is that it knows that people can't. They literally cannot tell the truth even if they want to. And so, especially with something like fandom, with sport, it's driven by ritual, it's driven by emotion, it's driven by habit. So just asking, why do you do what you do, won't produce an answer because people frankly don't know why they do what they do. And so we didn't ask why, we asked for a story. We asked people to tell us all about their fandom from A to Z, and we didn't ask them, when it started. We didn't tell them when it ended. We just left it very, very open-ended and just said, tell us a story. And this is probably my favorite finding of the entire study. We found that there's a ritual so deep, they started calling it before. So that means you're planning for your game day, right? You plan before, during, and after. No, People plan before. And so this is captured by these two quotes. So Carla says, I have a lucky bracelet I wear 48 hours before the match. If game day is Friday, I start wearing it Wednesday morning. My goodness. And then of course Jasmine said, there are certain things I do before, during, and after. So they start to plan, right, in this kind of pre-cycle. And that's fascinating. If we just said, hey, why do you do what you do before, during, and after the game, we would have never, ever found this insight. So a story really is critical to unlocking that truth. And so 3 more questions for Kira. So question A, has AI changed how your team generates hypotheses before a study, and has that changed what you ask for? Question B, how do findings like this actually travel across a portfolio? Do other Pernod Ricard brands benefit? And question C, has this study changed how you brief research going forward, or was it a one-off approach? So question A, question B, question C. Question C for the win.
I certainly don't think it was a one-off approach. I think you probably won't be surprised to hear that I care deeply about like open, creative questions and getting at consumers in new and interesting ways. And so I think this is certainly something we'll be looking to do in the future, especially when needing to unpack an audience that might be a little bit hard to get them to really like talk about some of the deeper emotional stuff moving forward.
Yeah, and we talked about 4 psychological principles, but what I will say is, I mean, we interrogate every single question that goes into the study with the same kind of rigor and ask ourselves, are people going to tell the truth when we ask this question, or do we need a more creative way to ask it to garner more insight, more authenticity. So I encourage you guys to do that as well. Every question is an opportunity to get better insight. So I'll pause there, and we'd love to answer any questions you guys have. Please.
Sorry, I might have missed it, but can you just describe the inclusion criteria to be part of the study?
Yeah, we didn't cover the inclusion criteria at all. So we were talking to MLS and NFL fans. So that was it across the board. We over-indexed a little bit on USH. That was important to us at the time. It had to be obviously people who were drinking spirits or open to drinking spirits, even if they don't necessarily do it during game day.
I think we also included a variety of like an avidity spectrum on fans for both sports as well.
Develop the characters for like the Guzzler or Greenberg? Like, did you have to do some free research on that to define that?
Great question. So I don't know if everyone heard, how did you develop the characters where we created that projective technique, the distance? So yes, we actually do secondary research as part of every single study. So before we even start, I mean, we're scanning everything online to see how are people talking about sports, how are they talking about fandom. So there's a little bit of a pre-research step to create the creative research, yeah. Absolutely.
I have a follow-up to that. During that entire portion of the questionnaire, are you asking that in the third person, like what the guzzler would do, and how the guzzler thinks about this, just to divorce it from their own experience?
No. So we wouldn't. No, we wouldn't like. Oh yes, I'm sorry. So the question was, once you have that character, that archetype that they identify with, do you take that through the rest of the study to say, okay, if you've identified as the guzzler, what does the guzzler do in this scenario, in that scenario, et cetera? So the answer is no. So we think about every question individual of how hard it can work for us. For that question in particular, it was okay, we need to do the projective technique, we need to draw the psychological distance. A different question would serve a different purpose, so we wouldn't carry that through. Yeah. Great. Anyone else? Oh, yes, please. Was the qualitative done exclusively online or in person? This was done exclusively online. In our experience, we find that it's very rare to garner in-person research these days. It really has to be right for the context for the moment. And the reason is we find that we just have much better quality recruits online, because someone who's available on a Wednesday at 1 p.m. to travel to the middle of New Jersey is a very specific person. And so by being online, you're opening to people, participating in the research on their lunch break or something like this. So you get much better quality recruits these days. Anything else? Great questions. I think I heard the question. To develop the archetypes, did we have research to inform who they are? Is that right? In what context did we do the character? Okay, yes. So that was a quantitative study. That was a quantitative study, yes. So again, we wanted to understand, drinking behavior as a whole. So it was important for us to build these archetypes to, again, understand how are people thinking about their game day? What are they doing? But you can't just ask, what are you doing? Because again, that feels like an interrogation. It feels like you're asking someone to confess. So by simply creating this archetype, it seems very silly, but you are creating that psychological distance. And you're allowing them to project what they do without feeling like they're confessing to you what they do.
I also, just coming from my side of the house, like I got my training in qualitative research and my sort of cut my teeth in the industry in qual. And so for me, like, I love a projective exercise, and I had actually never seen it used in a quant context before. And it was really, really interesting to see the ways that it actually did sort of bring new nuance and new insight into that type of question, which was, I guess, another surprising finding.
It's really interesting, like if I can speak frankly, I mean, just walking around this floor, right, where we see people optimizing and innovating is on speed, right? So they're optimizing, we talk about it as, the factory is being optimized. But what we're saying and what we're urging people to do is don't always optimize the factory, optimize the output, the actual product, make it better. And I think what we're saying here is we have an opportunity not to be slow, but to slow down and really interrogate every question that is being asked and make it work harder for us. If you ask it flatly, if you ask it robotically, that's what you're going to get back. And that's a lot of the starting point of our conversations with our clients. They come to us and they tell us, we keep getting the same thing over and over and over again. Well, of course you will. If you're asking the same question in the same way, you're going to get the same thing over and over again, even if you have a tool that now can promise you to get it to you 24 hours faster. So I think that's the real power of thinking about the human element and the psychology that goes into it. And again, whether that human element is a literal respondent or if you're engineering for a prompt for AI, it's still human.
What is the size or scope of the fandom? What share of the market, what share of the population? Are we talking about a small group or large?
The question was about the size of fans, of fans. I think, I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, obviously, everyone in the U.S. is to some degree a football fan, I think. I mean, not me, but other people. I'm in Texas, so me too. It's quite large. I think there's a lot of opportunity in sports fandom, and I think that's why a lot of brands are after it at the moment. If the question was about the size of the study, I don't remember off the top of my head.
I was
But
more concerned with the
got it. Yeah. It's a large universe. Obviously, I think the football universe is a lot larger than the MLS universe. There's a lot of soccer fans, but Major League Soccer is pretty new still. So still nascent, but a lot of people excited to see it grow. Yeah.
This is for you. In what tangible ways does this richness change your creative briefs, your innovation briefs, or marketing briefs?
Yeah, good question. So in what tangible ways has this kind of research changed various briefs, from creative briefs to marketing briefs, et cetera? I think one of the biggest ways was that it actually shifted the ways that we were talking about fans, especially talking about like casual fans versus avid fans and the ways that we were engaging with them. And so from that perspective, I think like the people that we are after and how we're talking about them was certainly a huge impact, was hugely impacted from this. I'm thinking about one specific question that we asked that was talking about, it was also a projective exercise, and it was asking specifically about what watching the sport feels like and sort of personifying or using metaphor to understand like what the feeling of community and connectivity of being a fan in this sport feels like. And I think one was like being at a concert. One was like I don't remember.
Yeah, it was like at a family barbecue.
Yeah,
things like that.
all kinds of different like ways of connecting, and that was a huge unlock in understanding how if we're talking about fans, we're not like a sports brand, right? Like we don't really have any credibility in sports, so we're not necessarily going to be like a Budweiser where everything that they do, the creative brief is like, all right, like here's a picture of a helmet, great, like we're good. So we really wanted to make sure we're focusing on like connecting people, and so really understanding how do people connect and what does that connection feel like shifted the way that we were creatively briefing. Yeah. Yes.
Since Jameson's a global brand, do you think the findings would be applicable in other markets?
So this was a U.S. only study, but I think soccer is a really interesting case study because like FIFA is so culturally different from Major League Soccer, and the ways that I think like Euro soccer culture versus US soccer culture is so different. To be determined. I think there are certainly different ways of applying, especially from like, what does community feel like and all of that kind of stuff. But I do think this is pretty US specific.
Please.
So specifically on the quant side, the notion of the more creative question asking, it demands a lot more of your respondent. What do you bake in to make sure that you are in fact getting quality, engaged, intentional responses to this survey?
I love this question. Thank you, sir, for asking it. If everyone heard this question, the question was, you're asking a lot more of your respondent with these creative questions. How are you incentivizing them to be engaged? They love these questions. They're having more fun. That is the engagement, and that's the trick. Because we're making these questions fun for them, they're much more involved. And we see this when we do the A/B tests of, a standard way, very robotic, neutral asking. People are bored. They're clicking through. They just want to get over with. But think about everyone in here. I bet you've taken a test about, your psychology and which one you are, right? The Myers-Briggs, right? We love learning about ourselves. It feels good to answer questions about ourselves, especially when they're framed in a way where you feel like you're learning about yourself. So it's actually interesting. We don't change the incentive. We see much better response rates, completion rates, every single metric. So thank you. Best question. Best question award. I think we're at time. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.